TMD is part of my life, but it isn't my life. It doesn't call the shots. It's not my master. So I created this channel and my website primarily to talk about life tips and career advice that I've learned these recent years. That's the reason why I chose the name Systems That Work, because it's what I want to focus on, systems that work. But before I create more content, I'd just like to have this honest talk about something in my physical system that doesn't exactly work the way that it should, which is my TMJ. If you've never heard of temporomandibular disorder, it's an umbrella term for conditions affecting the temporomandibular or jaw joints, chewing muscles, and the facial nerves. The symptoms and the severity of these symptoms could look different for different people, but the most common ones include stiffness or tenderness of the jaws, popping sound when opening or closing the mouth, facial pain, sometimes radiating down the neck and shoulders, discomfort around or inside the ears. Sometimes you'll hear an all of a sudden buzzing sound or the feeling that there's air trapped inside. There's also teeth grinding or clenching, a misaligned bite, sinus issues, and breathing problems. I've been living with TMJ since I was 12. I recently just turned 27, so that's more than 15 years of living with this condition. Most TMD patients that I know have it as an invisible illness. Like if you look at them, it's not really obvious that they have it. But if you talk to them and ask them if they're feeling any pain, they're actually dealing with it on a daily basis. For my case, it's both an invisible and visible illness. I have all the symptoms that I mentioned earlier. Aside from that, maybe you might have noticed, I do have misaligned bite. I wasn't born with it. I didn't always have TMD. So if you know me in person and maybe you've been wondering why my bite is the way it is, this is the reason. Now I know that all of you also have your own sufferings or other serious sources of hurt in your life, and that's partly why I want to create this video. I don't want to make my channel a channel of pretense where I just talk about the good things as if I'm always positive, because I'm not. And so for those of you who are watching, if you're having some extra hard time lately or today, right now that you're watching this video, I just invite you to, just let yourself be seen. You can start in the comment section below. Tell me, tell people about what you're dealing with. You don't have to detail it too much. Just say a little something about it, and who knows, maybe someone will see it and give you a piece of encouragement. I hope this video will give you a piece of encouragement. I was 12 years old and in 6th grade when I felt the first symptoms of TMD. I remember my sister and my brother telling me that they noticed a slight change on my face. I couldn't actually see what they were seeing during that time, but they were saying that one of my cheeks looked slightly bigger than the other. I also remember having frequent headaches back then, but I thought that that was normal. I thought maybe I wasn't eating enough vegetables or my hair had gotten too long and too heavy for my head. Maybe you're wondering, okay, so you've known since you were 12, you had the symptoms when you were 12. Why didn't you immediately seek medical attention? So, just a little bit of background, my family wasn't well-to-do back then. We had just enough to get by, and doctor appointments were a luxury that we couldn't afford. I was also recovering from a lung condition called primary complex during that time, so we were already spending a lot on my medication. In high school, my bite deviation became even more obvious. Then, before my junior year, I learned how to use the internet. And so here's one of the first things I did online. I researched my symptoms. I typed my worst symptoms: headache, jaw pain, face deformity, pain inside the nose when reading aloud, on the search bar, then hit enter. I read articles, read stories from patients, and then the realization came. This is my condition and there was no cure. Yes, there are treatments and massages and therapies and surgeries, but there's no assurance that they'll work the way patients would like them to. Almost all of the stories that I read, even now when I do research, end up in hopelessness and lack of healing. There's one woman who had spent thousands of dollars on therapies that didn't work, a lady who just wanted to opt out and kill herself, a guy who couldn't keep a day job because of the pain he's dealing with. The sad stories were heart-wrenching, and I felt how they felt, hopeless. During college, I was finally able to meet with an orthodontist who confirmed what I already knew, that my condition was TMD. He recommended that I undergo splint therapy and wear braces after a few months, but he also said that my bite might not be fully corrected. I did all the things that my family could afford. I wore splint for several months and then braces for several years. Unfortunately, most of my symptoms remained the same. TMD affected a lot of things in my life. For most of my teenage years, it was an illness that I loathed and lived in denial of. I refused to think about it and avoided conversations related to my jaws. But it kept catching up on me. Just when I felt that I was excelling academically, a classmate would comment on the way that I talk, the odd way that my upper and lower teeth met. Just when I was started feeling beautiful, a stranger would ask if I were eating candy or my cheek was just swollen. Just when I felt excited about the future because of my newfound passion for writing, facial and neck pain crept in, leaving me unable to do anything but stay in bed and wallow in self-pity. High school was tough. My battle during that time was more on my physical look and less on the physical pain that TMD punished me with. I was different, I knew. And if a pretty face were the key to a happy future, I know I'd be condemned to a lonely life. There were so many days when I wanted to die, so many nights when I just wanted to opt out, but I wasn't the kind who declared her loneliness to the world. I've learned how to keep a tough front early in life, specifically because I lost my father at the age of 7. And so I just kept living my days, doing my best in school and avoiding thoughts about my condition. I scheduled my emotional breakdowns. I only cried when there were too many triggers. When I hear comments I didn't want to hear, I pretended as if I didn't hear them. I'd wait until my heart felt heavy enough before I let myself cry. And when that sense of heaviness comes, I let myself think through the things that saddened me, the things I couldn't accept, the illness I couldn't seem to heal from despite many prayers. I would cry until I fell asleep, and then I'd wake up in the morning, ready to repeat the drill. Looking back, I'm thankful that God made me love books and writing. These were the things that kept me driven to live. These were the things that opened my eyes to bigger pictures. They told me that there's so much more that I could do, that maybe it's okay that I was different, that being different means I could stand out. Refusing to talk about TMD gave it the power to control me, to manipulate my beliefs, and limit the ways that I related to people and allowed people to show up for me. So when I was getting ready for university, I decided that I will no longer keep it a secret. I was about to enter an institution that I studied hard and prayed hard for, and I decided that I couldn't let TMD get in the way. I prayed to God for an opportunity to open up to somebody, and He answered. One morning, it was one of my first classes as a freshman. All of my classmates were also freshmen, and it was our first class in that particular course. I remember that our professor asked us to introduce ourselves, but she didn't want the typical tell your name and where you're from kind of introduction. Instead, she asked us to tell something that might be unique to us, something that others in the room might not have. And when she said that, my heartbeat quickened, and I just knew that that was the answer to what I was praying for. I prayed for an opportunity, and God was giving it to me, and I knew I had to take it. I don't actually remember what I said during that time. What I know is that when I mentioned TMD during that introduction, I immediately cried, and I was struggling to speak. I was all in tears, and I was also trying hard to control myself so that I wouldn't break down during that time. But even with my shaky voice and my tear-stained face and the fear of being seen as peculiar or different, that morning is one of the biggest breakthroughs of my life. I don't have a way of knowing what my classmates thought of me during that time, but that's not really important. What mattered to me and what really made the difference for me is that finally I was able to speak about this ugly part of my life, this part that I've been trying to hide and run from. And I knew that it was a first step to acceptance. And that morning was just life-changing for me. I wish I could say that I boldly and confidently muscled through college after that day, but I didn't. On the contrary, There were many days when I feared I couldn't finish my degree because of the pain that I was feeling. I had days when I felt ugly and unlovable, weeks when I kept socializing to the minimum because I felt self-conscious when talking to people. My TMD symptoms continued to grow worse during college. Just sitting in class was tiring. The casual chit-chats stressed my jaws out. Carrying a bag around campus, no matter how light, gave me body pain. And worst of all, I started harboring bitterness in this area of my life. I couldn't reconcile the fact that God can heal me anytime and yet He doesn't. I couldn't understand why the Bible declares healing miracles and yet I don't seem to have a share of those miracles. To rub salt to my open wounds, I met people who told me that maybe I wasn't praying enough, that maybe the reason why I'm not healing is because I have unconfessed sins, or maybe I'm not really repenting. Looking back, I now see how immature of me it was to be affected by people who blamed my small faith for my lack of healing. I shouldn't have let those people stain my view of God's love towards me and how He also longs to make me whole. But back then, with my insecure and overly sensitive young self, I was deeply affected. Eventually, I avoided praying about TMD. When I did pray, it was probably because I was on the brink of depression or at the peak of my anger because of my lack of healing. Most of my prayers that mentioned TMD were hostile, confrontational, and centered on asking God why He doesn't heal me instead of asking for healing. And that's how bad TMD affected me. It easily took me to a hostile stance before God. It quickly answered back to all my declarations of faith. And as you might have guessed, it caused me wounds that took years to heal. But while God didn't move in changing my external circumstances, He was changing me from the inside. He met me in the low places where I lingered and threatened by my lashing out. He didn't condemn my frustrations and anger. He met me where I was and carried me to places of greater joy, greater faith, and a higher calling. As with any spiritual journey, mine doesn't always point upward. I have days of strength and days of weaknesses. Without a spiritual foundation, I don't think I could have made it out of college alive. In my tossings between hope and hopelessness, praying for healing and doubting if I'll ever be healed, wanting to live and praying for death, God was kind to me. He gave me this grace, a spiritual community that helped me move higher, extend grace to others and myself, to wait and wait patiently even when it's hard. I had no one-time, big-time enlightenment. It was the small things, the short, quiet times with God, the once-a-week small group meetings, the planned and unplanned heart-to-heart sessions with friends, the decisions to show up in little ways. I could keep thinking of TMD as an enemy, but what I realized is that if I think that way, it doesn't defeat my condition, it defeats me. I had to relearn my identity and stop anchoring it on my weaknesses. TMD is part of my life, but it isn't my life. It doesn't call the shots. It's not my master. Working after college was a whole new ballgame, but here's one of the perks. I can finally afford to see a new TMJ specialist and start getting a series of new treatments. Unfortunately, again, no treatment has worked really well for me yet. In 2015, after over a year of working in a government agency, I decided to try applying for a teaching job in an after-school learning center. I held no formal teaching-related courses, had no teaching experience, but crazy enough, I got the job. I remember being elated and excited about the new adventure, but I was also dead scared. I was undergoing splint therapy, I think for the third time, so getting a job where I'll have to talk for most hours of the day wasn't exactly ideal. After my last duty in the government office, I walked to my apartment while listening to a worship song through my earphones. I talked to God as I listened. I remember asking Him, did I do the right thing? Should I really pursue this? If I take this teaching job, I will be so tired, I'll be in so much more pain, and I'll have to kneel before you to get by. And then it hit me. He likes that. God likes that. He wants me to kneel before Him, with or without pain. He called me to a life of surrender, with or without illness. Pursuing teaching was a leap of faith for me. It was an act of abandoning my reliance on my own strength and trusting that God can and will see me through. From a purely earthly perspective, it was a very stupid choice. Not only was it going to get in the way of my therapy, but the pay was also significantly lower than what I used to earn. But for some reason, I was convinced that I needed to do it. So I took the leap. After 6 months in that after-school center, I moved to another full-time teaching job in a private elementary school. I taught there for 3 years and produced 2 poetry books with my students, which we sold for the benefit of Filipino cancer patients. Yes, teaching was tiresome, and yeah, I doubted my decision several times. I frequently arrived home unable to do anything else than lie down and force myself to sleep. But I took my teaching job one day at a time, and God didn't fail me. In 2019, I moved to my next calling, which is to write full-time. I don't always have a positive outlook. I'm not always hopeful. I wake up tired sometimes. Most nights I go to bed unable to find a position that doesn't hurt my neck or my back. Something always hurts, except when I'm deep in sleep. Even if I'm just walking around, sitting still on a bus, or standing in line in a grocery store, or sometimes even when I do nothing but lie down, TMD makes me incredibly tired. And did I mention that it's not only TMD that I suffer from? I also have scoliosis, mild asthma, and a heart condition called mitral valve prolapse. I went through a really low point in my life last January 2019. I was in a public vehicle on my way to church when a sharp, almost electrifying pain shot through my left ear. I've never experienced that kind of pain before, so I didn't know what to do. I kept pulling on my ear hoping that the pain would stop. The pain lasted for about a minute, and after a few seconds it hit again, and I was scared. I headed straight to the nearest hospital to see an ENT doctor. While waiting for my name to be called, I kept praying that the problem was with my ear. Maybe I needed a good ear cleaning session. That could be it, right? I'll just have to pay for professional earwax removal, then I'll be okay. But that's not what happened. Instead, I heard what I didn't want to hear. There was no problem with my ear. I didn't need ear cleaning, but my TMJ needed serious intervention. The doctor recommended that I consider TMJ surgery, a procedure that's irreversible yet offers no guarantee that my jaws will be okay. I went home with a fresh sense of being chronically ill. I didn't want to undergo surgery, and even if that were my only choice left, I don't have enough savings to pay for the procedure and all the other costs that the recovery period would need. What followed that night with the ENT doctor was 3 months of isolation. I felt incredibly low. My frustrations felt raw and new, even though I've had TMD for several years already. I didn't want to leave the house except when I really needed to, and I didn't know how to talk to God. I was torn between trusting and feeling offended that He was letting me go through what I was going through. And I observed my prayers change from "please take my sickness away" to "please take me away." From "help me sleep so I don't feel pain" to "please don't wake me up." It was a dark season for me, and I didn't know how it would end, but it did end. What helped me the most during that time was a Bible verse that I read before the ENT appointment. I remember that I read and jotted it down in my notes, and that verse says, "What I tell you in the dark, say in the light." While there are many interpretations for this verse, what I personally felt God was telling me during that time was that I was going to enter a dark season, and that He will speak to me there. But if I'd like to speak His words in the light, then I needed to make it out of the dark. I needed to go through the season and then overcome it. And that's exactly what happened. Despite the difficulty of that season, days of feeling trapped and hopeless, I maintained my quiet moments with God. I remember saying something like, "My situation sucks, and I'm not sure what you're doing or if you have any plans of helping me out, but you're still God, so I'm still going to seek you even though I don't feel like it. I'm finding it hard to trust, but I'll keep showing up." Every morning, despite my bitterness towards life, I read the Bible. I mostly read from Ecclesiastes and the Psalms because those books seemed like the easiest to chew on. I kept at it, and I don't know how, but I slowly regained my trust, my joy, my faith, my drive to keep going. When I chose to listen to the truths of the Bible over my own doubts and frustrations, I thrived. Never in my life have these words become even more true. So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. As I continue to seek treatments that I'm hoping would help, what I'm sure of is that I'm not alone. I don't know why God doesn't grant me healing. I don't know why affordable and effective interventions are so hard to come by, but I still look forward to what's ahead. As much as I yearn for complete healing, I realize that healing is not my highest good. God is. My 15-year-old pain is not my life's biggest thing. Only God is my biggest thing. I wish I could tell my story differently and share with you a grand manifestation of both inward and outward healing. But while that's not my story yet, I rejoice in the grace that I'm given. I rejoice in the here and the now, and the full restoration that awaits.